Welcome back to NightlyHaven. I'm your host, Nikki. Tonight we're heading somewhere that looks peaceful from the shore, but apparently it has a secret beneath the surface. We're going to Lake Champlain, a massive body of water stretching between New York, Vermont, and Quebec. And for centuries, people have claimed that something enormous has been swimming beneath it. Something long, something strange, something that doesn't seem particularly interested in introducing itself. They call it Champ, and if that name sounds familiar, there's a reason. Because Champ is often called America's answer to Loch Ness Monster. But here's where the story gets interesting, because Lake Champlain has a history that is almost as strange as the creature supposedly living in it. And before we get into the monster, we need to go back, way back. Imagine this place thousands of years ago. There's no towns, no roads, no boats, no tourists standing along the shoreline hoping to see a mysterious hump in the water. Instead, there's ice. Massive glaciers cover the landscape, and as the ice age begins to retreat, those glaciers reshape the land. They carve valleys, they alter drainage systems, and eventually waters fills the basin that would become Lake Champlain. But for a period of time, this wasn't even a freshwater lake. It was part of something called Champlain Sea. Roughly 13,000 years ago, as glaciers retreated and the land changed, marine waters entered the Champlain Basin through the St. Lawrence region. For several thousand years, this landscape was connected to a marine environment. There was saltwater conditions. Marine organisms lived there, and eventually, as the land rebounded and the waterways changed, the sea disappeared and the freshwater lake we know today took its place. Now, does that mean some prehistoric sea monsters survived in Lake Champlain? There's no scientific evidence for that, but as the opening chapter of a lake monster legend, it's hard to beat, because beneath Champ's modern folklore is a real geological history involving glaciers, ancient marine waters, and a landscape that has changed dramatically over time. And that brings us to another famous monster. If you've ever heard of Loch Ness, you've probably heard of Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, and Champ and Nessie have a lot in common. Both are associated with large, deep bodies of water, serpentine creatures. Both have generated generations of eyewitnesses' reports. And both have become famous enough to have their own merchandise. At this point, these monsters have better branding than some actual animals. Could Champ and Nessie actually be related? Well, not literally. There's no secret underwater tunnel connecting Lake Champlain to Scotland, sadly. That would make the story considerably easier. Instead, the connection is more interesting from a folklore and geological perspective. Both lakes exist in landscapes dramatically shaped by the Ice Age. Both are surrounded by old stories, strange creatures, and both become famous because people looked across enormous stretches of water and occasionally saw something they couldn't explain. So, are Champ and Nessie cousins? Scientifically, no evidence. Cryptid folklore? Absolutely. We'll call them distant cousins who never answer each other's Christmas cards. But Champ's story doesn't begin with modern tourists. Long before Europeans arrived, people lived around Lake Champlain and knew its waters extremely well. There are traditions involving enormous serpent-like or water-associated beings in the region. One name sometimes connected to these traditions is the Gitteskog, associated with Abenaki tradition. Other traditions also contain stories involving enormous serpent beings, but it's important not to simply take every traditional serpent story and declare they were seeing Champ. That's not something you can prove, but these traditions have their own cultural and spiritual meanings. What we can say is that stories of powerful, mysterious beings associated with the region's waters existed long before the modern Champ legend became popular, and that's fascinating because it means the lake already had stories. The monster just needed a name. Now, we get to one of the most famous claims in the entire legend, Samuel de Champlain. In 1609, Champlain entered the region and explored the lake that would eventually bear his name, and for generations, people have claimed that Champlain himself saw the monster. You've probably heard this story: a massive serpent like creature, around 20 feet long, horse like head, terrifying teeth. But here's the problem: the famous monster description attributed to Champlain isn't supported by his surviving writings in the way the popular story suggests. Champlain did write about seeing a large fish in the region, but later retellings greatly expanded that account into monster story we know today. So did Champlain actually see Champ? We don't know. And that's an important distinction because the real history is more interesting than pretending we have evidence we don't. The Champ legend becomes much easier to document in the 19th century. In 1819, a newspaper reported a sighting of a large serpent like creature in Lake Champlain. A description was dramatic. The creature was reportedly enormous, and once the story reached the newspapers, Champ had something every aspiring cryptid needs: publicity. And then things got even bigger, literally. Enter P.T. Barnum. Barnum was one of the greatest showmen of his era. He understood spectacle and apparently saw that Lake Champlain monster as the perfect attraction. In 1873, Barnum offered a massive reward for the capture of the creature. The reported reward was $50,000. Imagining being Champ, you're peacefully swimming around the lake, and suddenly a 19th century circus promoter puts a bounty on your head. That's when you know you've made it. Barnum's involvement helped push Champ further into popular culture. Newspaper stories spread, sightings continued, and the legend became increasingly difficult to separate from entertainment. But then came the 20th century, and eventually a photograph. In 1977, Sandra Mansi was visiting Lake Champlain with her family. She reportedly noticed something unusual in the water. She grabbed her camera and took a photograph. The photograph would become one of the most famous pieces of evidence in lake monster history. The image showed what appeared to be a large, dark object rising above the surface. It looks vaguely like a creature with a long neck, and it is, well, creepy. But is it Champ? That's where the debate begins. Skeptics have suggested things like a floating log or optical illusion or an ordinary object. Supporters argue that the shape doesn't look like an ordinary piece of debris. The photograph has never provided a definite answer. And honestly, that's why people are still talking about it. A crystal clear photograph would settle the argument. A blurry photograph gives everybody something to fight about for the next 50 years. Now, Champ sightings didn't stop with the Mansi photograph. People continued reporting strange objects, wakes, and long shapes moving through the lake. In 2005, fishermen Peter Baudet and Dick Offleter, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, recorded video of something they believe could have been Champ. Again, it's not proof of a monster, but it's another example of something people couldn't confidently identify. And that's the pattern that keeps Champ alive. Not one perfect piece of evidence, but decades of stories, different witnesses, different years, different explanations, and a lake large enough to keep the mystery going. There are plenty of ordinary explanations. Lake Champlain contains large fish, including sturgeon. There are otters, waterfowl, floating logs, boat wakes, and strange wave patterns. A group of animals moving together can look like one enormous creature. A floating log can look remarkably different depending on how much of it is underwater. And when you're looking across a huge body of water without anything nearby for scale, your brain can have a very difficult time figuring out how large something really is. So maybe Champ is a giant fish. Maybe it's an animal moving together. I don't really believe that. Maybe it's floating debris. Maybe some sightings are simply waves or shadows. Or maybe a few of the sightings involve something we haven't identified yet. That's the part we can't answer. Of course, there's another theory, which I am definitely in this camp. Some people believe Champ could have somehow related to prehistoric marine reptiles, and this is where the Champlain Sea gets brought back into the conversation. The idea sounds simple. The area was once marine. Prehistoric reptiles lived in ancient seas. Maybe one survived. The problem, evidence isn't there. There's no established fossil record showing a population of prehistoric marine reptiles survived in the modern Lake Champlain. But I still hold out hope. And a large breeding population would need food, reproduction, and enough of individuals to survive for thousands of years. But I still think it's a dinosaur. We would expect evidence, but they say the same thing about Bigfoot, so I don't know. We can't honestly call Champ a surviving plesiosaur, apparently. But that doesn't make the story boring, because the lake itself really does have prehistoric history, just not necessarily a prehistoric monster that we can't prove. But maybe that's why the legend has lasted so long, because Champ doesn't require everyone to believe in a monster. All it requires is one person standing beside Lake Champlain, seeing something strange and wondering, what was that? The lake is enormous. Its waters can change with weather and wind. Its depths hide things from view, and humans have always been fascinated by places where we can't see what lies beneath us. Think about it. We can look at Mars, we can photograph galaxies billions of light years away, we can map out huge portions of the Earth's surface, and then we stand beside a lake, watch something move beneath the water, and suddenly we're 5 years old again saying, okay, but what if there's something down there? That's the question. And the honest answer is, we don't know. There's no scientifically confirmed evidence of a giant unknown creature living in Lake Champlain. But there's also a long history of people reporting strange things in the water. Some sightings have obvious, plausible explanations. Others remain ambiguous, which is basically rocket fuel for a legend. Maybe Champ is a giant fish. Maybe the lake is simply really good at fooling the human eye. Maybe the stories grew over generations. Maybe different phenomena were all blended into one creature. Or maybe something unusual really is swimming beneath Lake Champlain. Not necessarily a dinosaur. It's a dinosaur. Not necessarily a monster. Just something we haven't identified yet. And honestly, that possibility is almost more interesting because a monster gives you an answer. An unknown animal gives you a question. Lake Champlain has been shaped by ice, by water, by ancient marine environments, by human history, by stories. For generations, people have looked across its surface and wondered whether something was moving beneath it. Champ may be folklore. Champ may be misidentification. Champ may be a combination of ordinary things that became extraordinary through storytelling. Or maybe the lake really is hiding something. As for Champ and Nessie, no, there's no evidence they're literally related. They're so related. I personally think they're from the same family, but I kind of like thinking them as cryptid cousins. Two mysterious creatures living in two very different places, both hiding beneath dark waters, both appearing just long enough to make someone question what they saw, and both leaving us with the same frustrating answer. It's probably nothing. Followed immediately by, but what if? And that's the thing about lakes. You can stare at the surface for hours. It looks peaceful, it looks empty, but you can never see everything beneath it. So, the next time we're standing beside a big, quiet body of water, maybe don't worry about what's on the surface. Wonder about what's underneath it. I'm Nikki, and this is Nightly Haven. Until next time, keep your eyes on the water, because sometimes that little ripple is just a fish. Probably. Night.